Greetings and salutations, guys. Eric here with my review of Gladiator 2, a sequel 24 years in the making. But first, if you can like and subscribe, there is no greater way to show strength and honor. Maybe there's a couple greater ways, but, it's a pretty good one too. So yeah, Gladiator 2. It's 24 years for us, but it's actually 16 years for the characters. Paul Mescal stars as Lucius. We meet him under a different name, but Paramount isn't keeping which character he's playing from the first movie a secret, so neither am I. We meet Lucius as a soldier in northern Africa who's on the losing side in a war against Roman invaders, leaving him captured and sold to Denzel Washington's Macrinus, who sees his talent for fighting and puts him to work as a gladiator. Lucius, in the meantime, has his mind set on revenge against Pedro Pascal's Marcus Acacius, the Roman general who's responsible for defeating Lucius's people and taking the life of his wife. Now, here is where I reveal a dark secret that might destroy my credibility, which is I think that the original Gladiator is okay. It is a very acclaimed movie. It won Best Picture at the Oscars. I know a lot of people who absolutely love it. And, I liked it. It's very well made. I see the skill behind it. I see that it's well crafted and the performances are good. It's just never really resonated for me. I am a little detached from it. And I rewatched it before Gladiator 2 and kind of felt the same way that I did years ago. But I'm going to say that I really liked Gladiator 2, and in fact, I liked it more than the first. I don't think that's going to be the case for people who do adore the original, but I think that there is definitely going to be a lot of people who will respect this sequel, a sequel that understandably people were very wary about and very uneasy about and asking the understandable question of, why are we doing a Gladiator sequel? Can't you leave this movie alone? Every movie doesn't need a sequel, but I do think it justifies its existence, and that Ridley Scott coming back to do a follow-up ultimately pays off pretty well here. Personally, I found this to be a more engrossing and certainly a more complex story. Now, complex doesn't naturally mean it's better, but in this case, I was more involved in the story. And I really like that this movie starts out and it feels like, oh, it's one of those sequels that's basically just a remake, just kind of repeating the same things with slight deviations, but then turns out to be doing something very different. Because when we meet Lucius in this movie, he is a great warrior, and he loses his wife, and he is captured and taken to Rome to fight as a gladiator, and he wants revenge, and that all sounds a hell of a lot like Maximus. But there's a lot more happening this time. Right from the get-go, we understand that Pedro Pascal's character is not what Lucius thinks. And Pascal does a great job of conveying the sort of world weariness this man has, but also the fact that he is really sick of battle and war and feeling like he's being sent to conquer over and over again, and disagreeing with that and having been a good soldier for a long time, but now having the feeling that maybe it's time to push back on that. And so there's this great feeling of dread that the movie can give you, because you have a story of a man who is seeking revenge for reasons that are very understandable, but the person he's seeking revenge against, we can see the flip side of. We can see that this is a man that is not an evil person. We can see the things he's trying to accomplish that are good and are just in their own right. And then you have Connie Nielsen returning in a pretty large role as Lucilla, who is also none too happy with how Rome has turned out since the original movie, and working to do her best to change that, which is an uphill battle because she's got two emperors to deal with now, brothers who are played by Joseph Quinn, and Fred Hetchinger as Gaeta and Caracalla, the new emperors of Rome, and like a lot of characters in the Gladiator movies, are based on real life people. And yes, these guys are narcissistic and they are foppish, and they do remind you initially of Joaquin Phoenix in the first movie, and it feels like another place where it's gonna just be a sequel slotting in a slight variant of what we saw the first time. But no, that's not true as well here. They have some big differences from Phoenix's character, and they have differences from each other that we learn about, and we kind of learn what is really driving these guys, but also all the other characters bouncing off them and all the other characters working to stop them or work with them in their system. And yes, as an aside, it's pretty fun to see Pedro Pascal and Joseph Quinn have a lot of scenes together in Gladiator 2, playing characters that I'm guessing will be pretty different from the ones that they're playing in Fantastic Four next year. But hey, maybe I'll be surprised and they're exactly the same. Besides Connie Nielsen, Derek Jacobi is also back from the first movie, though it's kind of a nothing role this time out. It kind of feels like they wasted him. Overall, though, Gladiator 2 feels much more like a true ensemble movie than the original did, which was much more focused on Maximus and Maximus's goals and what was going on with him. This time, there's just all these other characters, and we really bounce around between them, and we really see what's driving them all and what they all want, and how that is going to kind of have them pitting against each other as the film continues. The cast are all great. Prior to this, I'd only seen Paul Mescal in All of Us Strangers, which I thought he was terrific in. And yes, I know I should see Aftersun, which got him an Oscar nomination. But he's very good here as Lucius, bringing the right determination and strength of will to the role, even though I don't think Lucius is the most interesting character in the movie. But he's also very credible as a physically strong person, and I really appreciated how they showed him as a true brawler. There are some similarities to how Maximus fought in the first movie, but there's also some big differences. There's almost kind of an MMA thing to his way of fighting, and there's some great moments of just sort of seeing his power and strength. That, some good wincing and oohing and awing that you'll do when you see what he does to some of his enemies and what happens around him, because these battles can get pretty nasty, as you might imagine. I mentioned earlier that Connie Nielsen has a sizable role. I really liked her in this movie. She shows how this character has evolved, but also just how she is fighting so hard to achieve this dream that her father had that has not come to occur, and why that's so upsetting to her. It's a bit surprising that Connie Nielsen didn't have a bigger career after the first Gladiator. Not that she hasn't worked, and of course she was in the DCEU, she was in Wonder Woman, but it just feels like she should have had bigger leading roles, and it was really gratifying to see her back in this movie in such a prominent role. I'm really glad that Ridley Scott realized that she should be important to this story. But ultimately, and perhaps not shockingly, Denzel Washington is the standout here. This is a really fun role for him. He is playing a very intelligent character, which is usually the case for Washington, who just exudes intelligence. But in this case, this is a very conniving person, very manipulative, and it just feels like Washington is having a blast playing him. But arguably the real star of Gladiator 2 is Ridley Scott, who is 86 years old and still directing at a pretty remarkable rate for any director, and directing at a scale and with spectacle that is still so impressive. And no, every movie he makes isn't great, and I didn't think Napoleon last year was very good, but I really like Gladiator 2, and I just think by and large, that what he's doing still is so impressive. It's just pretty amazing to see him just continue to go this big, never hold back. I mentioned some of the fight scenes earlier as far as Paul Mescal is concerned, but there's a lot going on here in that regard, as you might imagine. The movie's called Gladiator, and this time out, there's more animals involved after the tigers in the first movie, and there are some cool aquatic moments in this movie as we see that the Colosseum has gone bigger on what it's doing as far as spectacle is concerned. And it all packs the proper punch. And look, Ridley Scott returning to do another Gladiator movie was a very precarious and risky thing. I mentioned earlier the fan hesitation and wariness to him doing it at all, and it so easily could have been a disaster. It so easily could have felt like what the hell are you doing? Why are you trying to recapture this glory from earlier? But no, I think that this movie, it both sort of stands on its own just as a really good movie in its own right, but I also think it serves as a really good bookend to the story from the first movie. And I understand you watch that first film and it's not like you're saying, man, they need to make a sequel. There's so many unanswered questions. But I think that this one does justify its existence by finishing a story that maybe you didn't know wasn't finished yet. And it does not feel like it's trying to set up for more sequels, even though some studio executive might say, hey, let's do that because, this is Hollywood and that's how it can go sometimes. But it just, it feels like Ridley Scott had something specific he wanted to accomplish, and I think he has. And I think that's really commendable. So those are my thoughts on Gladiator 2, which hits theaters on November 22nd. Thanks, guys. I'll be back with more soon. Take care.